Welcome to The Buzz. I'm Christopher Conover. This week, the status of home building in southern Arizona. Our state is in a housing crisis. Population is increasing at a rate that new home construction has not been able to keep up with. As the number of new households grow, either by people immigrating from other states or natural population growth, more homes of all types are needed. We start with a look at single-family home construction. Like many industries, 2022 brought a series of supply chain snags and growing material costs. To see if those problems are clearing up or if new ones are arising, we checked in with David Godlowski from the Southern Arizona Home Builders Association.
Well, I definitely think that the mortgage interest rates have had a cooling effect on new home construction in southern Arizona. I like to say the industry was able to survive COVID, material price increases, unprecedented supply chain issues, but it was really that increase in mortgage interest rates that caused things to pull back. We saw for really from late last summer through earlier this spring a significant slowdown in traffic and activity, but have seen things start to pick up as I think people have just come to accept in the current interest rate levels are being more normalized.
You just mentioned supply chain, and we heard about all kinds of supply chain during COVID. Is that still a problem in home building, or has that eased up like some of the other, but not all of the other supply chain issues have?
Supply chain issues continue to linger, but they're vastly improved from where they were a year ago and definitely 2 years ago. You'll hear anecdotally situations where a particular type of product or building material may be delayed, but it's not that chronic problem across the board that we had seen. For example, pre-pandemic, it was taking maybe 6 months or so on average to build a new home. That time frame jumped to 10 to 12 months during the peak of the supply chain issues, and now we're back down to more of a 6, 7, 8 month build time. So things have gotten much better, but it's not perfect by any means.
I assume that's for southern Arizona. If somebody listening to this wants to buy a home and build a home in Flagstaff, say, or even New Mexico, is it the same time frame, or does supply chain depend a little bit on where you're trying to build your home?
I'm sure there are some markets that are performing better than others, but I think generally you're having similar issues, um, regardless of the market you're building in, because a lot of it is from like a national or large supplier. So let's just say it's cabinets. It doesn't really depend on where you're building if you're using one of the larger, cabinet vendors. So I haven't dove into that specifically, but would suspect that supply chain issues are probably relatively the same regardless of the market.
So we've been talking a lot about past issues, if you will, and whether or not they have fixed themselves in the last year or two. Has anything new arisen in a positive or a negative way when it comes to issues for home builders?
I think that we continue to operate in southern Arizona in a market, a housing market that has very limited inventory, especially if you look at the supply of resale housing. And so, as long as we continue to have low inventory, which is going to help new home building because people aren't going to see what they want in that resale market, and so new homes will be competitive. So, despite the increase in rates, I still see a future that will look good for home building in southern Arizona. And so that's not necessarily a new phenomenon, but that dynamic that continues to persist and will certainly shape the market here for the foreseeable future. And it's difficult because if you own your home and you're paying an interest rate that's 3% or less, what's the motivation for you to go out and pay an interest rate over 7%? And so it is going to take some time. Hopefully, we see more of a stabilization from the Feds, and possibly an easing at some point in the future. But people are going to have to wrap their minds around the reality of what our rates are. I do see that continuing to be an issue going forward, but there are other elements that lead me to believe that home building is still going to do fairly well for the next year, if not longer.
Are there any disconnects between what people want and what new housing can provide, or home builders in the area are able to provide to fit the market need?
That's a great question. I think the benefit of that new home is the customization, right? And you're going in and you have a number of models that a home builder is offering, and they have just gotten very creative in trying to adapt to what the home buyer is looking for. That space for dedicated offices. As more people work from home, the builders are trying to take that into account. Just use and maximizing that floor plan, so there's really no wasted space. And not to mention benefits like energy efficiency. So I do think that there is that opportunity for that home buyer to really try and customize to a great degree what that home that they're getting into. That is really just the advantage that only new housing, new homes can offer.
I've got a lot of family in South Florida, and I grew up there, so I still pop back and forth. And one of the trends that they're seeing there is people buying homes, bulldozing them, and then building a custom home on that. Are we seeing that in southern Arizona, or are we holding on to our historic homes more here?
There's some amount of redevelopment that's done where an existing home is replaced by a new home, but it's just not the same type of situation that you're seeing in other markets. There's still a lot of land available for custom homes where you're buying the lot and building from the ground up and not having to deal with an existing structure. So I don't want to say it's non-existent, but it's certainly nowhere prevalent as some other markets.
And when you say custom home, you mentioned earlier models that builders have. I would assume most people building custom homes are picking from those models and not going to an architect and saying, here's my dream, draw it out and make sure it'll stand, and then coming to you all.
Yeah, you definitely have a range of options for the consumer, that they can go to some of the home builders, whether it's a local home builder or one of the high volume production builders, and they're going to offer you different models that you can select. They're going to build your home on the lot within that subdivision. And then you're going to have that other segment of the market that is going to want to go to the architect, because they're going to want to build their dream house just the way that they want it. And they may take those architecture plans to a custom home builder who just specializes in providing that unique home. You have some builders who build what is considered a semi-custom home, where they may have plans, a certain number of plans that a home buyer can choose from, and then there's some degree of customization of those plans, and those can be within a subdivision that the builder may own, or that builder may choose to build that on the lot that's owned by the homeowner.
All right. Well, thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
That was Southern Arizona Home Builders Association President David Godlowski. Materials and labor are one big cost related to buying a new home. But perhaps the biggest cost for a buyer is getting access to the large sum of money they need. Interest rates on home mortgages have more than doubled since the start of last year, according to the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, also known as Freddie Mac. Their current rate is over 7%, a number not seen since 2002. So, how do rising interest rates affect home purchase affordability? To answer that question, the Buzz producer, Zach Ziegler, spoke with University of Arizona economist Dr. George Hammond.
The Eller Economic and Business Research Center just published some new data talking about home affordability, showing that Tucson is following the state and national trend that shows things are becoming less affordable according to the House Price Index. First off, can you tell me about what that index is and what it means for Tucson?
So yes, we have been tracking housing affordability as it has declined, just massively uh, uh, since the pandemic began. And it turns out the index that we track comes from the National Association of Home Builders and Wells Fargo. And there's a lot of these indexes around. That just happens to be the one that we track. And what that data shows is that the share of homes sold in the Tucson metro area in the second quarter of this year that were affordable to a family making the median income, that share was just 38.6%. So, far less than half of the homes sold in Tucson recently were affordable to a family making the median. And that was even a little bit below the national average at 40.5%. So, we've seen, during the pandemic, home prices have just skyrocketed. The median sale price in Tucson has increased by about 50% since 2020. And that obviously will have a big impact on housing affordability. But starting about the middle of 2022, of course, the Federal Reserve began hiking the federal funds rate, and that caused mortgage interest rates to roughly double over the past a little bit more than a year. So, you put, skyrocketing home prices together with doubling of mortgage interest rates. And boy, that's a recipe for just plummeting housing affordability.
The monthly number of homes sold has dropped year over year the past few months, but prices are still 2 to 3% higher than last year. Does that mean that people are just being priced out of the market, and that's why we're not seeing as many homes sold?
I think that's definitely part of the story. And housing affordability again really tells the story. It's just plummeted. In Tucson, before the pandemic began, just over 71% of the homes sold in Tucson were affordable to a family making the median, and now we're down to 38.6. So, that kind of drop in housing affordability will have an impact on the number of homes sold. Absolutely.
So Freddie Mac right now is saying that interest rates are a little over 7%. There was a while during the pandemic where those rates were under 3%. How does that much of a jump in interest rates affect what people can afford?
Well, it has a huge impact. Most people take out a mortgage to purchase a home, and when the cost of that mortgage rises significantly due to massive increases in interest rates, that really affects the affordability of the homes that people are looking at.
Along with that, I mean, prices do continue to go up despite those monthly payments getting bigger because of those higher interest rates. Does that tell us something about who it is that's buying homes right now? Are the people who can buy the people who can either pay cash or aren't taking out necessarily really big mortgages?
Well, the rising median home prices, which are still hitting new highs here in Tucson, even after increasing by more than 50% from before the pandemic. That suggests that there's still a strong demand for homes, and that there are buyers out there who can afford to pay these much higher prices. Some of those may be people who are selling a home in a much more expensive market. Keep in mind that even though housing affordability has fallen significantly in Tucson, and that's happened around the nation, uh, housing is much more affordable in Tucson than it is, for instance, in LA. Housing affordability in LA, using a consistent measure, was 3.2% in the second quarter. So, by that measure, housing is 10 times as affordable in Tucson as it is in LA. So there are places that are much worse off, and we may be attracting migrants from those markets who are selling a home, and they can come to Tucson and pay cash.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing to think about is it's not just people who already live here who are the ones buying houses. So
Yep.
one area of housing that doesn't seem to be getting any better is the number of permits to build new homes. It was down most of the past 5 months. What's causing the disconnect there? Are prices still just not high enough to make building houses worth it for home builders?
I think home builders are reacting to the same things that home buyers are seeing. So, housing permit activity was really strong during the pandemic. Both single family, multifamily housing permits were up significantly. In fact, for kind of 2020 through 2022, housing permits in Arizona were at some of the highest levels we had seen since the housing bust during 2007. But we did see single family permits in particular really drop off during the second half of 2022 as it became clear that house prices were going to stay elevated compared to their pre-pandemic level, and as mortgage interest rates really spiked. So I think builders are anticipating a bit of a slowdown in demand. The good news is that housing permits have recovered a little bit as we've gone through 2023. They were really particularly low in January of this year, but they've recovered a little bit. But housing permits, particularly single family housing permits, are going to be down a lot in 2023, I think, compared to what we saw in 2022 and earlier in the pandemic.
So what's it going to take to maybe see a bit of a rebound in that? Would a drop in interest rates be helpful, or do prices just need to continue to go up before it's really worth it for home builders?
Well, we'll need to see. Hopefully, interest rates will come down. I'm confident that we will see gradual, steady income growth in Tucson. That will help with the income side of the equation. House prices, even though they're elevated, they're not rising at the same pace they were during the early months of the pandemic, say, 2021 and 2022. So those, there are a variety of factors that I think are going to come together and help with housing affordability, and we'll see, home building respond, as we go, through 2024 and even into 2025.
So you and I are recording this just a bit before the Federal Open Markets Committee meeting results are announced. So we don't know yet what's going on with interest rates. So I'm going to ask a question this way and not make you forecast and immediately be proven right or wrong by the time of broadcast. Will anything other than like a massive change, like 0.5% or more up or down, have any sort of effect on Tucson's housing market, or are we just going to basically be waiting for bigger changes?
Well, I think it'll take bigger changes. We'll need to wait until the Federal Reserve sees that inflation is actually under control, and they start easing interest rates a little bit for that influence to gradually dissipate. And as we go through the next couple of years, incomes will rise, and that will help as well.
And so you said a key word there, years. I'm guessing this is not the type of thing people can necessarily expect to be better, come early 2024. It's going to take longer.
It appears to me that it will take a couple of years for, the housing affordability to recover back to levels that appear more normal.
Well, Dr. Hammond, thanks for chatting with me today.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks.
That was Dr. George Hammond, director of the University of Arizona's Economic and Business Research Center, being interviewed by Zach Ziegler. Home builders are often quick to complain about a bureaucratic step that can slow the process: permitting and inspections. Municipal governments across the country have been working on ways to lessen the paperwork required to get shovels in the ground on new homes. One example is the City of Tucson's new Fast Lane permit program. To learn more about those efforts, I spoke with Juan Garcia from the city's Planning and Development Services Department.
Well, so the review lanes that we've introduced were created to better tailor our review timeframes to the project scope. So essentially, smaller projects should and will have a shorter target review period to try to accommodate those that are less intense, less complex, where we can try to facilitate their movement a little faster than the other ones.
So if someone comes in and they're looking for a permit to build a new house, join the American dream, so to speak, what goes into the process typically to get a permit to build a house?
Well, I think there's a very important distinction to make because we handle two different types of permits when it comes to building a new single-family residence. We do have a process using a model plan, which is used primarily by the larger developers doing tract homes, developments of that nature. So those are pre-approved, reviewed, and approved. And then once the land is set up and the site is developed, they're trying to get those permits rapidly so they can start construction on those individual lots. And with that process, because we've already approved the plan itself, we're able to facilitate that, with a 5-day turnaround to turn those permits over.
5-day turnaround, that's a number that a lot of people are going to be happy to hear, especially on those model homes, as you said, where you're not coming up with your own dream plan. You're using something the builder has. How big of a change is that with these new permit lanes?
Well, so the model plan has always been available to the larger developers and even to some smaller infill projects. I think the difference is we've streamlined our process internally so that we can review those in a more expedient way. Just trying to consolidate some of those reviews where before it would have been 4 or 5 different people touching it. Now it may be 2 or 3.
So another thing that's often talked about as a way to expedite new home permits is what's often called those one-stop shops, places where everything someone needs approval-wise to legally build a home is located in one department. Gilbert and Scottsdale have those. Is that true in Tucson, or would a builder have to make multiple stops to get all the permits?
Well, that's definitely been a focus of ours, is trying to consolidate all those different agencies or those different disciplines into a one-stop shop. And I think that was the thought behind the TDC, the Tucson Development Center. Unfortunately, we still work with outside agencies such as Pima County Wastewater, Tucson Water. So there still is a little bit of running around, but we've done everything we can to try to facilitate just a fast, straightforward process for people.
We've been talking about permits for new homes, but what about permits for existing homes? You want to add a casita, or you want to build on, or heck, you want to put solar on your roof. All of that has to be permitted. Do these new lanes help with any of that, or is it just new homes?
No, they do help. We've been able to take some of the different permit application types, like you said, a residential solar or an addition, and based on the complexity, we're able to move them into one of the 4 lanes. We have a 1-day service lane. We have a fast lane, which is 5 to 15 days. And then we have a standard lane, which is our typical review time of 30 days. And what we're working on is the development of staff at various levels so that we can start dispersing the work among younger, less experienced staff and educate them so that they can complete those simpler reviews in a more timely basis, and reserving our more experienced staff for the more complex projects.
So another thing that's talked about in a lot of jurisdictions is tiny homes. It came up during some city council meetings this summer. Have you heard of any changes for Tucson dealing with tiny homes?
It's certainly something that's under discussion now. Our mayor and council is very interested in tiny homes and what they mean to Tucson and what they could mean to the housing shortage. So we're definitely looking at all the different means to facilitate that. We're looking at different orientations as far as, where can they be placed in a development type setting, and from a code perspective, what do we need, and what are they actually? Are they site built? Are they modulars that are brought in from a factory? So we're definitely looking at all those different variations.
All right. Well, thanks for spending some time with us.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate you having me.
That was Juan Garcia from the City of Tucson's Planning and Development Services Department. And that's the buzz for this week. Find all our episodes online at azpm.org and subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcast. Just search for The Buzz Arizona. We're also on the NPR app. Zach Ziegler is our producer with production help from Desiree Tucker. Our music is by Enter the Haggis. I'm Christopher Conover. Thanks for listening.
Arizona Public Media's original programming is made possible in part by the Community Service Grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.